We've all seen some bad deadlifts all the time. And there are a lot of reasons that deadlifts can, things can go wrong. But a common one is not knowing how to pull the slack out of your deadlift well. So, first of all, what is slack? Slack is any kind of lack of tension. It's something you can get in the squat. If you're coming down to the bottom and your brace is loosening, you are loose. There's slack in your body. In the deadlift, it's most easily visible as the bend in the bar. Are you taking that out? And the rigidity in your body. Have you actually set your body rigidly against the full weight of the bar? A couple of things to note. Main thing is there's a lot of ways to pull the slack. And we're going to try and have it reasonably simple and concise, not make it too confusing to understand. Another thing to go with that is that pulling the slack is going to happen no matter what. Doing a deadlift, to complete the rep, you're going to have had to pull the slack out of your body and out of the bar, but we want to do it on your terms. So, why are we doing this? We're doing it because we want to get into like a high position. We want to pull that slack out and reduce that range of motion a little bit. We want to be able to actually tension against like a rigid bar. We've pulled the slack out, so it's not just when we start, we think we're pulling the slack, but we're pulling tension, but we're just sort of like, taking what's already there in the bar. Rather than if it's tight, it's taut, then we can make our body's tension against that a lot better than we can with no tension. Lastly, for a lot of people, they find getting the weight off the floor is the hardest part of the deadlift. And a lot of the time, for beginners at least, that's because they don't know how to properly create that pre-tension against the bar to sort of feel the weight somewhat before they go. So with a squat, you pick it up on your back and you can feel, okay, it's about this heavy and you've got this whole eccentric coming down to load up and be ready to drive out of there. You don't have that on the deadlift, which I think is not only like physiologically can be important, but psychologically it's quite important to have that, okay, I'm bracing my body against this heavy weight. And a lot of people don't know how to create that part of the lift if they haven't been taught how to pull the slack correctly. What are we pulling the slack out of? I've mentioned the bar. We're not just pulling slack out of the bar, we're also pulling slack out of our own bodies. And if we have a hook grip, straps, or even just any kind of grip, we're sort of pulling the slack out of our grip. Because again, you can't really set it the same way if you're just loose on the bar versus putting some tension into it. All bars, especially deadlift bars, but all bars have some bend to them with enough weight on there. So we want to pull that out of the bar. A common heuristic is you pull the click out of the collar and the plates. When you lift, ideally, you've pulled that amount of tension out so that when you actually start to initiate the lift, you don't hear that click anymore. It's kind of silent. That's one way to think about it. But essentially, we're pulling the bend out of the bar, putting some tension into the bar before we actually lift it. Along with that, we're pulling the slack out of our body. It's not really going to be possible for you to find your tallest, strongest position just loose, hands on the bar, right? Like a lot of people set themselves, way too low, and then if they actually are forced by the bar or by being deliberate, they can create a lot better of a position in their body. So it helps you tension your body into the right position to actually hold a realistic deadlift position. So we're pulling that slack out of our body. And then, of course, I said the grip. So things do roll if you've got hook grip. You can't just be like loose. You can't just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to close my hand there and it's going to be fine. You need to actually sort of feel that, okay, is that a secure position? Can I pull from there? You feel that tension. Yep, okay, you're ready to go. Same with straps, right? You can't just have them be just like loose on there. You've got to have actually gripped them and pulled the slack out of those pieces of fabric. Those are some of the reasons that we want to pull the slack and some of what we're pulling the slack out of. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how you actually do this process if you have no idea where to start. The first step to getting ready to pull your slack is setting yourself into an actually tall position. So a lot of people, when they, it's heavy, they sort of get really deep down into this like arms bent, low hips position. And that's just not going to be very effective. You want to have your arms long and your shoulders up as far away from the bar as possible, so long as you're not like really rounding your back. So you want to be in a reasonably neutral position, nice and tall position. And the reason you want to have your arms long is it's like pulling a rope where you got two boats. One's tied to the other and you're trying to pull the other boat. If one's completely stopped and the other one's trying to go fast and the rope goes very quickly from loose to full tension pulling, it's going to jerk the other boat and it's not going to be a very smooth transition. You're going to have all sorts of things getting thrown around out of place. So we are trying to make our arms nice and long, have them at that full taut tension before we apply any of that pressure. So we have a nice smooth movement of the bar, the boat. The second part of pulling the slack, now that we're in our nice position where we've got like a little bit of tension on the bar, we're going to do a more aggressive upwards pull. This is going to be the upwards pull around our shoulders, which is going to precede our later downwards push. So this is essentially using Newton's third law, that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. We're trying to anchor with our shoulders, drawing them up to resist being pulled down when we're going to try to push the world away and come up with the bar. Think about like a leg press, where one of the reasons that you're able to do such a good job of pushing the weight with your feet is because you've got this unmoving like seat where your back's braced against it. And if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't be able to push anywhere near as well if you just had to like stabilize with your body. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create that back rigidity, that anchor with our shoulders being drawn up, so that we can very stably push downwards and move the bar. The third and final part of pulling the slack is having a simultaneous push downwards as we do that drawing upwards of our shoulders. You may have heard this pairing of things called wedging before, where essentially that's what it is. It's drawing our shoulders up while we're pushing downwards at the same time. So essentially when you know you've done a good job is you want to feel the weight is in your hands, a decent proportion of the weight, especially if it's heavy, has already been almost lifted, right? When it's light, if you do a very good wedge, that simultaneous pull up and push down, if you do that with like a light weight, like 30%, 40% of your max, you should be unable to do it without the bar kind of lifting up. That should be already happening for you. So you want to feel that kind of tension, that 50%, 3/4 of tension coming out of the bar before you even try really hard to lift, because you should be putting a lot of effort into this. This should be something that is effortful. This is an important part of the lift. Once you've actually done that part, you've aggressively pulled that slack with your shoulders up, pushing down, you're now ready to actually do the lift. And then from that point, it should feel braced, steady, and you are ready to stand up and do the easy part. You've seen the process now. Here's a few extra tips for you to take with you as you learn to pull the slack. So something to keep in mind is if you watch lifters who are very good at pulling the slack, some people it looks very distinct. There's this clear sort of like upward pull, drive in this tall position to sort of pull every bit of slack out of the bar in their body, and then they lift, and it looks quite distinct. And some people it all seems to happen at the same time, where really it's just happening closer together, like on a shorter time frame. And both of those are fine ways to do it. However, for most people who don't really know what they're doing yet, you're probably going to want to do it in that more split up way, in that more two-part way, so that you get more time to practice it. So you're going to want to move a bit slower when you're learning it. So really think deliberate upwards pull, downwards push, pull the slack out of the bar, of your body, then lift, rather than trying to do it all very quickly. Because if you do it really quickly and you don't really know what you're doing yet, it's probably going to be a bit of a mess. Another thing to think about is how you start in general. Some people have like a static start. Some people like to go a bit more dynamically, do a bit of a quicker start. Both of those are also fine ways to lift. People who really just try to put a lot of movement into the way they start, like going like straight legs into dropped hips, or people who just essentially like grip and rip, like go from the top, brace, come down, pick it up and go. Both are fine ways to lift. But again, all those people do pull the slack. It's just going to be easier to learn probably if you start with the static position where you get down there and you do every step as you go. And if it turns out that later you're better with that sort of quick dynamic start, a more simultaneous looking slack pull into moving, that's fine. I'd just say start with the slower static start and the two-part pull, because it'll ingrain the learning and the habits a little bit better. So hopefully that answers all of your questions that you might have already had or didn't know you had. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Hands on my knees, shaking ass on my thigh shit. Post me a pic, finna make me a profit. When the liquor hit, then the bitch get toxic.
Why the fuck you in the club when niggas wild?